July 22nd, 1994. Nancy Stairs looked out her window and down the street. She had heard the whistle of the train blow, so she knew she would soon see her niece Crystal walking to her home from the station. How glad she had been to read Crystal's letter to expect her on the train today, and there she was. Nancy painstakingly walked to the door and greeted Crystal with a big hug and kiss, and, "Oh, you dear thing, that suitcase must be heavy. Come and put it in the guest room. Then you come right in the front room and have a long talk with me. I could eat you all up. I'm so glad you could come." Crystal obeyed, and when she entered the room, floods of wonderful memories came to her mind of the many wonderful vacations she had spent with her Aunt Nancy. Aunt Nancy was her maiden aunt, but to Crystal she had been more like a grandmother, since she never had the opportunity to get to know her grandmother on her mother's side of the family. Crystal never tired of hearing stories about her grandparents and great-grandparents from Aunt Nancy. They had believed the truth, and it was through them that it had been passed down to her mother and then to her. "Aunt Nancy, how did you get that room as fresh as a daisy as always? You know I could have done it when I got here." "Oh, don't you mind about that. I'm not in the grave yet. Now tell me the good news that you hinted in your letter you sent to me telling me you were coming." "Well, you see, I've come to stay as long as you need me." "How could you do that with your wedding coming up on August 6th? I know you've told me that your husband-to-be is a real gem, but even I'm not stupid enough to think he would postpone his wedding for you to take care of an old maiden aunt." "But you're right, Aunt Nancy, the wedding is postponed, at least until after David gets out of his cast." "His cast? What did he break?" "His leg. Somehow he tripped down a flight of stairs at work. It was a blessing he didn't break his neck, only his leg. So you can understand that he doesn't want to limp down the aisle with me. The poor boy. You know, in the 2 years you've known him, the only thing you've ever talked about him was how much he has come to believe like we do. How did you meet, and how did he get saved?" Crystal told her how they had met because of work and how he had picked her brain and then didn't seem to want to pick her brain any longer. Then how he had called her after that wonderful dream she had had to tell her he had gotten saved. "That's wonderful, dear, but how did he get saved?" "You know, Aunt Nancy, I'm ashamed to say I really can't answer that question. For the past 2 years, since David came back into my life, we have spent so much time with his wanting to find out what makes me so different from church-going Christians who have been duped into believing lies about who are God's true chosen people and his plan for them in the present and ages to come, that I can't recall my ever asking him how he got saved. I've been so happy with finally finding the Lord's perfect choice for me that I guess the how didn't really matter until now." The more Crystal talked about how perfect David and she fit together, the more Nancy began to smell a rat. She didn't openly share her concerns with Crystal, as she didn't want her to think that the Lord couldn't perform such a miracle. But based on her own journey of trying to find the Lord's perfect mate, she didn't feel it was really possible. Hadn't she almost learned the hard way herself? But fortunately, the man she thought she could marry had slipped up and showed he believed that social drinking was okay. Nancy did not feel the same, so she broke it off. Nancy didn't know how she was going to find out if David was all Crystal painted him to be, but she was determined that before they tied the unbreakable knot, she was going to know for sure David was worthy of her beautiful niece. Jasper came home from being away on a case that he had not been able to solve. On his way home, he drove past a liquor advertisement on the side of the road that, of course, he would have to see. His stop off at the bar had been a long one, but he somehow still had the sense not to try driving home, so he had walked. However, he planned to pick up his car early in the morning so no one would see it in the bar's parking lot. He was about to go upstairs to bed to sleep off his stupor when he saw a letter addressed to himself on Prissy's desk. It was from Crystal. He opened it up, and out fell the letter he had sent to her. He looked frantic for a note to go with it, but there was nothing. She did not believe me, he breathed aloud. His letter had not worked. She was still so angry with how he had treated her that she didn't even bother sending a note with his return letter. Dejected, Jasper took the letter and went upstairs. He unholstered his gun, put it to his head, and shot himself.